What happens when America's sweetheart meets Hollywood's most unpredictable late-night host in a clash that nobody saw coming? You won't believe what unfolds when Jennifer Aniston sits down for what should have been a routine promotional interview, only to find herself trapped in a verbal battlefield that would end her appearance in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two entertainment giants collide in spectacular fashion. The tension was palpable from the moment Jennifer Aniston walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel live stage. What viewers at home couldn't see were the behind-the-scenes conversations that had already set the stage for disaster. Sources close to the production revealed that Kimmel had been pushing his producers for weeks to make this interview memorable, suggesting he wanted to create viral moments rather than conduct a respectful conversation about Aniston's latest projects. As the cameras rolled and the audience settled into their seats, Kimmel's opening seemed standard enough. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incredible Jennifer Aniston." The applause was thunderous, and Aniston gracefully made her way to the guest chair, flashing her trademark smile that had captivated audiences for decades. She looked radiant in a sleek black dress, her hair perfectly styled, clearly having prepared for what she expected to be another pleasant late-night television appearance. "Jennifer, thank you so much for being here," Kimmel began, his voice carrying that familiar, casual tone that had made him a household name. "You look fantastic, as always." "Thank you, Jimmy. It's great to be here," Aniston replied, settling into her chair with the ease of someone who had done countless interviews over her illustrious career. But something was already off. Veteran celebrity watchers would later point to this moment as the first red flag. Kimmel's smile seemed forced, almost predatory, and there was an unusual glint in his eyes that suggested he had an agenda beyond the typical promotional chat. His producers had briefed him on several controversial topics, and despite explicit instructions from Aniston's team to avoid certain subjects, Kimmel seemed determined to push boundaries. "So, Jennifer, I have to ask about something that's been all over social media lately," Kimmel continued, leaning forward slightly. "There's been a lot of speculation about your personal life, your relationships, and I know you've been pretty private about these things." Aniston's smile faltered slightly, her media-trained instincts immediately recognizing the shift in tone. She had been in the entertainment industry long enough to know when an interviewer was about to cross a line, and her body language subtly changed. Her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, and her hands clasped together in her lap. "Well, Jimmy, I'm here to talk about my new project," she replied diplomatically, attempting to redirect the conversation. "I'm really excited about the film we've been working on, and I think audiences are going to love it." But Kimmel wasn't deterred. In fact, her attempt to deflect seemed to embolden him. Right, the movie. We'll get to that. But come on, Jennifer, the people want to know. You've been photographed with several different men recently, and there's been all this speculation about whether you're dating anyone seriously." The audience began to sense the uncomfortable shift. What had started as typical celebrity banter was beginning to feel more like an interrogation. Aniston's publicist, watching from backstage, was already reaching for her phone, ready to intervene if necessary. "Jimmy, I think we should focus on why I'm here," Aniston said, her voice maintaining its pleasant tone but with a subtle edge creeping in. "I've always been private about my personal relationships, and I'd prefer to keep it that way." Kimmel's response would later be described by media critics as tone-deaf and aggressive. Instead of respecting her boundaries, he doubled down. "But that's exactly what makes it interesting. You're one of the most beloved actresses in Hollywood, and people are invested in your happiness. Surely you can share something about your love life." The studio audience was now noticeably uncomfortable. The usual laughter and applause had died down, replaced by an awkward silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Camera operators were getting signals from the director, unsure whether to continue filming or cut to commercial. Aniston's patience was clearly wearing thin. Her decades of experience had taught her how to handle difficult interviews, but Kimmel's persistence was crossing professional boundaries. "Jimmy, I've made it clear that I don't discuss my personal relationships publicly. I think we should respect that and move on to talking about my work." But Kimmel, perhaps sensing that he was losing control of the interview, or maybe driven by his desire to create viral content, made the decision that would define the rest of the evening. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, a move that immediately sent alarm bells ringing throughout the studio. "Actually, Jennifer, speaking of your personal life," Kimmel said, with what could only be described as a smirk, "I have some photos here that were just sent to me by our producers. These were taken just last week." The color drained from Aniston's face. Whatever was on that phone, it was clear that she wasn't prepared for it to be discussed on national television. Her entire demeanor changed in an instant, from politely frustrated to genuinely alarmed. "Jimmy, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. Kimmel held up his phone, angling it slightly toward the audience cameras. "These are some pretty intimate shots of you and a certain someone having what looks like a very private conversation at a restaurant in Beverly Hills." The audience was now completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't typical late-night television banter anymore. This was becoming something far more serious and potentially damaging. Aniston stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Jimmy, stop, right now." But Kimmel seemed to be feeding off the drama he was creating. "Come on, Jennifer, they're not that bad. Just two people having dinner." But the body language suggests there might be more to the story. The tension in the studio was now electric. Crew members were looking at each other uncertainly, unsure whether this was planned or if they were witnessing a genuine confrontation unfold in real time. Aniston's publicist was frantically trying to get the attention of the show's producers, signaling for them to cut to commercial. "Jimmy, I'm warning you," Aniston said, her voice now carrying a steel that few people had ever heard from the typically gracious actress. "If you show those photos, this interview is over." Kimmel's response would later be dissected by media experts and cited as one of the most unprofessional moments in late-night television history. Instead of backing down, he actually began to turn his phone toward the audience, as if he was about to display whatever images he claimed to have. "Oh, come on, Jennifer, it's not that serious. People see celebrities out to dinner all the time." But as Kimmel moved to show his phone to the cameras, something in Aniston's expression shifted completely. The polite, media-trained facade that she had maintained throughout her career was cracking, and what emerged was raw, unfiltered anger. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice rising for the first time. "Don't you dare turn this into some tabloid spectacle." The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could sense that something was about to explode. What had started as an uncomfortable interview was rapidly evolving into a full-scale confrontation that would change everything. The moment that would define the entire evening came when Kimmel, despite Aniston's clear warning, actually began, tilting his phone toward the main camera. The audacity of the move sent shockwaves through the studio. Crew members froze in place, unsure whether to continue filming or immediately cut the feed. The director was frantically gesturing from the booth, but Kimmel seemed oblivious to everyone, except his guest, who was now standing rigid with fury. "Jimmy," I said, "stop." Aniston's voice cut through the studio like a blade. Gone was any pretense of Hollywood politeness. This was a woman who had reached her absolute limit, and everyone present could feel the shift in energy. But Kimmel, either driven by his ego or genuinely believing he was creating compelling television, pushed forward with reckless abandon. "Jennifer, you're being way too sensitive about this. It's just a couple of photos. Your fans want to see you happy." "My fans?" Aniston's voice rose several octaves, her composure finally cracking completely. "You think my fans want to see you? Ambush me on live television? You think they want to watch you violate my privacy for your ratings?" The audience was now witnessing something they had never seen before. Jennifer Aniston, America's sweetheart, The actress, who had maintained grace under pressure for decades, was genuinely angry. Her hands were shaking, whether from rage or adrenaline, and her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of anger spreading across her face. Kimmel, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of what he had unleashed, continued his assault. "Look, I'm just saying that hiding relationships doesn't help anyone. You're a public figure, Jennifer. This comes with the territory." "The territory?" Aniston stepped closer to Kimmel's desk, her voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "Let me tell you something about territory, Jimmy. I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've dealt with tabloids, paparazzi, and invasive media my entire career. But I have never, and I mean never, had a host threaten to show private photos of me on their show without my consent." The studio had fallen so silent that the hum of the cameras was audible. Even the usually boisterous audience seemed to understand. They were witnessing something historic and deeply uncomfortable. Several audience members were visibly shifting in their seats, looking like they wanted to leave, but were trapped by the unfolding drama. Kimmel's response would later be cited as the moment he completely lost control of the situation. Instead of apologizing or backing down, he actually laughed. A short, dismissive chuckle that echoed through the silent studio like a gunshot. "Come on, Jennifer. You're being dramatic. They're just photos of you having dinner." The laugh was the final straw. Aniston's eyes flashed with an intensity that made several crew members take a step back. "Dramatic? You want to see dramatic? Jimmy?" She reached across his desk and snatched the phone from his hands before he could react. The move was so swift and unexpected that Kimmel actually recoiled in his chair, his mouth falling open in shock. "Let's see what's so important that you're willing to destroy your credibility over," Aniston said, looking at the phone screen. What she saw there made her face go white, then red with fury. "These aren't photos from last week, Jimmy. These are from 3 months ago, and they're not of me having dinner with anyone. These are photos of me leaving my therapist's office." The revelation hit the studio like a bomb. The audience audibly gasped, and several crew members exchanged horrified looks. Even in the world of invasive celebrity journalism, photographing someone leaving therapy was considered crossing a sacred line. Kimmel seemed to realize for the first time that he had gone too far. "Jennifer, the producers just gave me those photos. I didn't know what they were exactly." "You didn't know?" Aniston's voice was now shaking with rage. "You were going to show photos on national television without even knowing what they were? Do you have any idea what you almost did?" She held up the phone, turning it toward the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, your host was about to broadcast photos of me seeking mental health treatment. Photos that were taken without my knowledge or consent, showing me at one of the most vulnerable periods of my life." The audience's reaction was immediate and visceral. Several people began booing, while others sat in stunned silence. The mood in the studio had shifted completely from uncomfortable tension to outright hostility directed at Kimmel. "Jennifer, please let me explain," Kimmel stammered, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Explain what?" Aniston shot back, her voice carrying across the studio with perfect clarity. "Explain how you thought it was appropriate to ambush me with private photos? Explain how you decided my mental health was fair game for your entertainment? Explain how you completely disregarded every professional boundary that exists in this industry?" Kimmel was now visibly sweating, his carefully crafted late-night host persona crumbling before everyone's eyes. "The producers, they said it would make good television." "Good television?" Aniston's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Jimmy, good television doesn't require destroying someone's dignity. Good television doesn't involve violating someone's medical privacy. Good television sure as hell doesn't involve threatening to broadcast someone's most private moments without their consent." The confrontation had now reached a fever pitch that no one in the studio had ever experienced. This wasn't scripted drama or manufactured controversy. This was a genuine collision between two entertainment industry professionals, with one having crossed every conceivable line of decency. Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Jennifer, maybe we can start over. Forget about the photos and just talk about your movie." But it was far too late for damage control. Aniston looked at him with a mixture of disgust and pity that was somehow more devastating than her anger had been. "Start over?" she repeated slowly. "Jimmy, you just tried to exploit my mental health struggles for ratings. You attempted to broadcast private medical information without my consent. You laughed when I told you to stop. And now you want to start over?" The studio was holding its collective breath, waiting to see how this unprecedented confrontation would resolve. But instead of resolution, the tension continued to escalate, building toward an explosive climax that would leave everyone involved forever changed. Aniston turned to face the audience directly, still holding Kimmel's phone in her trembling hand. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady despite the obvious emotion coursing through her. "I want everyone here to understand what just happened," she said, addressing the stunned crowd. "This man invited me onto his show under the pretense of discussing my work. Instead, he attempted to exploit my private medical information for entertainment. He tried to turn my mental health journey into a punchline." The audience's murmur of disapproval grew louder. Several people were now standing, their faces showing a mixture of anger and disgust directed at Kimmel, who remained slumped in his chair looking smaller by the minute. Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Jennifer, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. Maybe we both got a little heated, but stop." Aniston's single word cut through his rambling like a knife. "Just stop talking, Jimmy. Every word that comes out of your mouth right now is making this worse." She walked closer to his desk, her presence commanding the entire studio. "You want to know what's really sad about this? I came here tonight excited to share my work with your audience. I was looking forward to talking about a project I'm passionate about. Instead, you turned this into an ambush designed to humiliate me." The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was becoming the most dramatic late-night television confrontation in history. Kimmel's usual smugness had been completely replaced by what looked like genuine panic, as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. "I have spent decades building my career on professionalism and respect," Aniston continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I have worked with countless hosts, journalists and interviewers who understood the basic principles of human decency. You, Jimmy, are not one of them." She placed his phone down on his desk with deliberate precision, the small sound echoing through the silent studio. "Those photos you were so eager to show? They were taken on one of the hardest days of my life. I was seeking help, trying to work through some personal challenges, and someone violated my privacy by photographing me in that vulnerable moment." The audience was now completely on her side, with several people calling out supportive comments. "You tell him, Jennifer!" someone shouted from the back. Aniston acknowledged the support with a small nod before turning back to Kimmel. "And you, without even knowing what those photos contained, were prepared to broadcast them to millions of people. Do you understand how dangerous that is? Do you comprehend the damage you could have caused?" Kimmel tried to interject. "I never meant—" "You never meant what?" Aniston's voice rose sharply. "You never meant to get caught? You never meant for me to fight back? Because you certainly meant to show those photos, Jimmy. You threatened me with them multiple times." The host was now visibly perspiring, his carefully styled hair beginning to look disheveled. His characteristic confidence had completely evaporated, leaving behind a man who clearly had no idea how to handle a situation that had spiraled completely out of his control. "I think," Aniston said, her voice returning to a more measured tone that somehow seemed more threatening than her earlier outburst, "your audience deserves to know what kind of person you really are. Behind all the jokes and the charm, you're someone who thinks it's acceptable to exploit another person's mental health struggles for ratings." She turned to address the cameras directly, speaking to the millions of viewers watching at home. "Mental health is not a joke. Therapy is not something to be ashamed of. And anyone who tries to use your healing journey against you is not someone who deserves your respect or your viewership. The studio erupted in applause, the audience finally finding their voice in support of Aniston. The sustained clapping went on for nearly a minute, during which Kimmel sat frozen, unable to regain control of his own show. When the applause finally died down, Aniston picked up her purse from beside the guest chair. "Jimmy, I'm going to leave now, and I want you to remember this moment. Remember what it feels like to have your professional reputation destroyed in front of a live audience. Remember the feeling of being exposed for who you really are." She paused at the edge of the stage, turning back one final time. "The difference between us is that I'm going to walk out of here with my dignity intact. You're going to have to live with what you've done." Kimmel finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Jennifer, please don't go. We can work this out." Her response was delivered with devastating calm. "Jimmy, there is no working this out. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. You violated trust that can't be rebuilt. And you did it all for what? A few viral moments? Some social media buzz?" The audience began a slow clap that built into thunderous applause as Aniston began walking toward the exit. Several audience members stood up, giving her an ovation that went on for several minutes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aniston said, stopping at the studio door and turning back to address everyone one final time. "Thank you for your support tonight. You've reminded me that most people still understand the difference between entertainment and exploitation." With that, she pushed through the door and disappeared from view, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos. The audience was still applauding, many of them now booing Kimmel, who remained slumped in his chair looking utterly defeated. The show's director, finally realizing that there was no recovering from this disaster, signaled for the cameras to cut to commercial. But the damage was already done. In the space of 30 minutes, Jimmy Kimmel had managed to destroy his own reputation while simultaneously turning Jennifer Aniston into a symbol of grace under pressure. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience began filing out, many of them were already pulling out their phones to share what they had witnessed. The confrontation that had started with invasive questions about Aniston's dating life had ended with a complete reversal of power, leaving Kimmel exposed as someone willing to exploit mental health struggles for entertainment. The evening that was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance had instead become a defining moment in late-night television history. Aniston had walked into the studio as a guest and walked out as a champion of dignity and professional respect. Kimmel, meanwhile, was left to face the consequences of his actions, sitting alone on a stage that had become the scene of his own professional downfall. The confrontation was over, but its impact would resonate far beyond that studio, changing how people viewed both the boundaries of entertainment and the courage required to stand up for what's right, even when the cameras are rolling.